Thank you everybody so much for having me, and to the folks from KiwiTech. We're going to talk a little bit about go-to-market strategy, and most specifically, kind of how to find your playground. If you think about some of the comments earlier, especially around fundraising, at the end of the day, a lot of us are looking for, as we like to say at the Lonely Entrepreneur, the playground where nobody else is playing. And so what we hope to do today is give you a little bit of background about Lonely Entrepreneur, but then really get into some of the go-to-market techniques that strategically can differentiate you from others and make you successful as an entrepreneur in a highly competitive world. So just a little bit about a background about Lonely Entrepreneur. Our mission is to unlock potential of entrepreneurs worldwide, and we work closely with the KiwiTech folks to try to advance that mission together. Obviously, KiwiTech, with its model of supporting startups throughout the world, and the Lonely Entrepreneur have the great privilege of working together. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background because it's so relevant today to some of the comments that Moisen was making in the beginning. For those of you who don't know, I started my career as a corporate lawyer in New York City, and I founded what got to be known as the first company in the US to reward people for being healthy. Built that company up over the course of about 10 years. And in 2008, after about a decade of working very hard on the company, building it from scratch, up to about 500 employees and 60 million in revenue, watched our company nearly get destroyed overnight by the financial crisis of 2008. And so what's going on right now with the virus and the pandemic is very near and dear to us. In fact, it's the reason why we started the Lonely Entrepreneur. And we were fortunate enough to build the company back up and sell it in 2013. And that led to the mission we stated before about the Lonely Entrepreneur. One quick note, we have a free entrepreneur survival guide that's available at lonelyentrepreneur.com, survival-guide, free to everybody. So please feel free to take advantage of that. Okay. So I hope we have a little bit of context of not just what we're going to talk about go-to-market, but also in the context of what's going on, in the world around us. And we're not going to focus as much on, some of the hair on fire things like cash and expenses and things like that, but really on what does it take to be a successful entrepreneur in 2020, especially as it relates to go-to-market strategy. A little bit of a context. Before COVID, each and every one of us faced an unlimited amount of competition. We were talking before about investor decks. Do we really believe now that there's a market that either doesn't have competition or anybody, including the biggest players in the world, if any of us identify a market that is intriguing or large, does any of us think that any of the biggest players in the world wouldn't be in that market? Is there any business that Exxon or Apple or Facebook couldn't be in tomorrow? So we all, pre-pandemic faced a hyper-competitive world. And afterwards, after things subside, hopefully sooner rather than later, that competition is going to be even more intense, right? There's going to be more and more folks vying for the same eyeballs. And the question is, what does it take to be successful as an entrepreneur in 2020 when it relates to go-to-market strategies? And, a lot of times, I think many of us, when we think about our businesses, some of the questions that were asked before as it related to fundraising and other go-to-market approaches and product, as Emma presented, are tactical questions, right? And some of those are about how do I use social media, and some of those are about how do I create product features. But at the end of the day, each of us need to be able to find that unique niche in a highly competitive world. And one I would suggest that isn't so much hurt by competitors, but more hurt by clutter. And I was saying, so our biggest competitor, if you will, while there will always be other competitors out there, is clutter. Think of ourselves, think of some of the things that Adam was just talking about. What does it take us as consumers to actually respond to something, right? Are we really comparing product A versus product P in detail? Are we, as a business buyer, buying business solutions, are we going to all the details of why one is better than the other? No. What we've really got to make people do is we've really make them have to say ooh in some way. And when somebody says ooh, then they'll pay attention to all the details. Okay. A quick example, Toyota did a survey a couple of years ago, and they asked consumers, would you rather build your car from scratch, literally go online and pick all the features you want and assemble a car? Or would you rather have the option to pick from 3 packages, you know, the ski package, the sport package, the speed package? And 79% of consumers said they'd rather just pick from the 3 packages. Okay, and it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Especially to a lot of the technology-driven leaders here on the call today. We would all think, of course, we want to just be able to assemble our own car exactly how we want it. But we live in a world of clutter. So hopefully a couple of the tools and techniques I'm going to talk to you about go-to-market strategy are designed to make that buyer go, ooh, so that you can stand out from the crowd. One of the things that I want us to really think about is, you know, if we think about the transition from the year 2019 to 2020, it's not good enough to have passion and grit and a good idea. We have to develop many skills to be a successful entrepreneur. And as you've heard from a lot of the presenters today, those skills are fundraising and product and how to impact behavior. And while we don't have all the capital and resources we need, we do have the ability to think differently. And we're going to have to bring that ability to think differently against the backdrop of what I'm going to share with you next, which is hopefully differentiating go-to-market strategies. So I'm going to cover 5 of them relatively quickly, and happy to provide more information later on this as well. The first is what we at The Lonely Entrepreneur called finding playgrounds where nobody else is playing. As I mentioned to you before, I believe our biggest competition is clutter. Okay, and so do you say to yourself, if I was going to start a public relations firm, for example, your friends might say to you, hey, that's great. There's a trade show for public relations professionals over at the convention center next week. You should go. Well, in my opinion, that's the last place you should go. That's where all your competitors are. That's where everyone else has bigger trade show booths and more money. You really have to find playgrounds where nobody else is playing. So let me give you a couple of examples. Take my business, which I mentioned briefly prior to Lonely Entrepreneur. We started the first company to reward people for being healthy. These are loyalty-based concepts that were applied to healthcare. At the time we started our business in the early 2000s, the average American was enrolled in 27 loyalty programs. There were loyalty players that were running some of the largest loyalty programs in the country, like credit card loyalty programs and airline loyalty programs. There were no lack of loyalty programs in the world. All we did was apply that to healthcare. And by applying it to healthcare and creating our own playground, you get to do a couple of different things, and certainly we did. Number one, you get to define the rules of that playground. You get to define the pricing, you get to define how people should buy, and frankly, you get to set traps for your competitors about what they don't know yet. Now, I'm making it seem like finding that playground is incredibly easy. It's not. It's incredibly difficult. But when you do find it, you'll find that you are the only game in town. I'll give you another example. We were working with a wellness company that was selling, general wellness solutions to large companies. And as you may know, there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of these wellness solutions today. And they were really struggling to break through. And we started to poke and prod and to ask them, tell me a little bit about your programs. Tell me a little bit about your customers and who you're working with. And it turns out they were doing a lot of programs for the Hispanic community. And we said, let's expand upon that. Well, it turns out that there are some very unique things about that playground. Wellness programs for the Hispanic community were incredibly impacted by 2 things. One was religion. If a church or a pastor told a member of the Hispanic community to do something for their health, they were incredibly more likely to do it. And secondly was transportation. It became incredibly important Not that individuals didn't want to be healthy, but they didn't have means of transportation. So they pivoted the company and turned it into a company that specialized in Hispanic wellness programs. And their business started to take off. They found a playground where nobody else was playing. And in addition to that, in that playground, they started to define the rules. They didn't talk as much about diabetes as they talked about religion or transportation. Okay? There are many, many, many examples. This is an incredibly difficult thing to do and thing to find, but when you do find it, right, you feel like you really have your North Star, where when you get there, there will not be competition because you're defining it. I'll give you a final example, which is Starbucks. When you really think about Starbucks, Starbucks is a really dumb idea. Here's the premise in the beginning. We're going to create coffee that costs twice as much as all other coffee out there. There's no lack of coffee on the planet. And oh, by the way, we're going to have all this real estate. So if for some reason our coffee doesn't sell, we're stuck with literally billions of dollars of real estate. If someone would present that to us, we would be like, wow, that's really silly. But what did they do? And remember back to the early days of Starbucks. They created a new playground. They created a community. They said, come here. Don't even buy coffee. Just come here and hang out, right? If you guys ever know the story of McDonald's, McDonald's many years ago used to make the chairs uncomfortable so people would leave quicker. Starbucks said the exact opposite in its early days. They said, come here and meet everybody. And all of a sudden, that's what everybody did, even though the coffee was more expensive, right? And there was a coffee shop on every corner, okay? When you find the playground, you define the community. To find this playground, bring together your best advisors, bring together your best colleagues, your smartest friends, and try to think of different ways of doing it, okay? I believe, and we at The Lonely Entrepreneur believe, this is the most important skill that an entrepreneur has to have, okay? Second, define a success by a criteria you win, okay? This is very similar to finding playgrounds where nobody else is playing. And the best example I have this is a Super Bowl ad conducted by Budweiser in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. It's a medieval times ad where some guys on a horse, kind of gallop up to a castle and knock on the castle door, and they say, hey, we're here to deliver your corn syrup. And the sentry from Budweiser says, oh, no, we don't use corn syrup. You have to go down the road to the Coors Light Castle or the Miller Lite Castle. Now, I don't know about you, but I never knew beer had corn syrup or didn't have corn syrup. And in addition, even if I did, I never have bought beer or didn't buy beer because they had corn syrup. All Budweiser did was to define a criteria where they win. And I know Budweiser's not a startup, but is there any industry that's more competitive than domestic beer? Right? You have to spend $100 million in advertising just to get on the ride. They defined a criteria that they won by, right? And now all of a sudden, Coors and Miller Lite are suing Budweiser. It's the talk of the town about whether beer has corn syrup or doesn't have corn syrup, even though it's not something anybody really cared about. Okay? Define success by a criteria where you win. Especially if it's not the criteria that the market is using today to define success. Okay. Next, positioning is more important than product. I remember somebody said to me in my early days of my company, a couple of IT developers said they hated Microsoft products. Right. This is back in the early 2000s. That they hated them, and yet everybody used them for some reason. Right. There are so many examples where the positioning of a product is more important than the actual product. And anybody who's a runner, if you go back 10 or 15 years, most runners would say that Nike running sneakers were deficient to Saucony's and Asics and other running sneakers. And yet Nike sells 50 times more running sneakers than any of those brands. It is really, really difficult for all of us as technology entrepreneurs to not get caught up in our product, right? We write code, we're happy to work day and night doing it. But we always have to remember that positioning is more important than product. Remember, most people are not paying attention to the details until you make them go, ooh, okay? So it's super, super important just to make sure that everything that we're doing is around positioning. Next, you can't chase every customer. I know we have entrepreneurs from around the world on the call today with KiwiTech. In the early stages of our business, wouldn't every one of us have the inclination to go anywhere for revenue? We might go and build a rocket ship to Saturn if we could get the first $1 million of our revenue, right? It's natural that we do this, but you can't chase every customer. Here's why. Every single market you go into, every single customer you go after will have unique challenges. It's too big, it's too small, it's too expensive, it's too this, it's too that, right? But if you don't pick a customer, if you shift from customers whose names start from the letter A to go to customers whose names start with the letter B, there's just going to be a different set of challenges. And the difference is we never learn and get the depth we need in order to really win and understand that market. Think of it this way. I know none of us are commuting to work right now, but think about when you commute to work. If you commute to work the same way every day, don't you really know when the traffic hits and how the weather affects and all those different types of things? We really get good at it, right? But what if you were forced to commute to work a different way every time? You would literally be figuring it out each and every day. Pick a customer, stick to it, and you can certainly iterate a little bit, but I think you'll get a depth of knowledge and understanding that will really allow you to have greater success than bouncing around, especially when we as entrepreneurs have scarce resources. Okay, and then finally is building a rocket. We like to say at The Lonely Entrepreneur, why build a rocket when there are plenty out there? And here's what we mean by this. If I were to start my health rewards business today, I wouldn't build it from scratch. The idea is a sound idea, but there are people out there like, for example, United Healthcare and Cigna and Aetna that have what I didn't have, which is capital and resources and millions and millions and millions of individuals that they could give my solution to, okay? There are some times where you should build a company from scratch and get friends and family and hire somebody like KiwiTech and raise your Series A and do all those fun things. But today, there are many, many companies that have capital and resources but lack the innovative ideas that they need. So those rockets are out there. So sometimes you should build your company from scratch, but sometimes you should say to yourself, I've got a really good idea, but it needs capital, and it needs big capital, and it needs distribution, and it needs big distribution. And instead of building that company from scratch, pitch that company to a larger organization that already has a rocket, and you can attach yourself to. Okay, these go-to-market approaches are, in our opinion, the most important things that entrepreneurs need to do. The how of how all this is executed is super, super important. We would never suggest that great products and services are not important, but really making your buyers and your investors go, huh, and then going, here's how we're going to do it and why we're going to do it, is an incredibly important skill to strategically align your organization to all the fundraising, execution, team members that all get aligned around, you know, North Stars that really position you in a, as we like to say, finding a playground where no one else is playing. Okay. Thank you very much for to everybody, to the folks at KiwiTech and all the folks who are taking the time to listen today, and happy to take some questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that, Michael. That was really valuable. All right, so it looks like we have a couple of questions here. How to position in a blue ocean?
Well, I think that's what's the great thing about a blue ocean, right? Is that, you know, I wouldn't even start a business in any way, shape, or form without a blue ocean, frankly. And that's, you know, similar to finding a playground where nobody else is playing. I think the key thing is to show your know-how of that space, right? to really define, when we did rewards for healthy behavior, even though there were lots of big competitors, the ability to really kind of say, these things are going to happen in this space, and almost to set traps for your competitors. I know there were a bunch of things that we were doing. People were being rewarded, for example, for their waist circumference, right? So just measuring their waist, they would get financial rewards. And one time a woman went into the doctor who was pregnant and couldn't get her reward. And we used to use that example in sales materials. So that was an example of really, how do you use the fact that you're defining the marketplace and set traps for competitors that, frankly, in our case and in many cases, are much bigger competitors than we were.
Okay, great. It sounds like finding your playground is the same as building a category. It seems like the category king story goes against the data-driven traction story investors want to hear. Any advice?
I think that you do not get data-driven traction, or frankly any traction, unless you find your playground, right? So if you go into markets that have competition and you're competing on criteria that others are competing on, I think you've already lost. Because remember, everybody else has more capital and resources. So unless you're defining the market or the space in a new way, whether or not it's different, it's contradictory to category, not category, I don't think is the point. I think the point is, whether it's a niche or a market segment or who you're going after or the way you're going after, you have to find that playground unique to you. And that's what I believe is ultimately gives you the traction, and ultimately the data-driven traction about what gets you there. I think competing against others who have more capital and resources without really finding that playground. And remember, that playground does not have to be that big. There are plenty of playgrounds out there that are incredibly large and fruitful, that if you win, you can go to another playground and another playground.
All right. We have a viewer asking how to define strategy in an emerging lean approach.
It's a great question. I think that whether it's product strategy or company strategy, you've really got to be addressing a problem, as some of the folks said earlier, in a way that is completely different from the way it's being defined already today or addressed already today. I mean, that's what we kind of mean by a playground. Many people are trying to solve lots and lots of different challenges. So take, for example, what we're trying to do at Lonely Entrepreneur. We are offering learning tools and consulting and all the stuff you'd expect, but a lot of our brand name represents something that we believe is a playground, which I would imagine everybody on this call experiences, which is the thing we share, the struggle of being an entrepreneur. And so that is our playground. How do we help founders work through the struggle by learning what they need to learn? So I think that too many times people move right to the how and the tactics and don't really define, what is the playground they're going to win. That my example of the Hispanic wellness company, there were hundreds and hundreds of wellness companies out there. They just found a playground where they were the only game in town. And then after that, everybody becomes a follower. So your lean approach has to emphasize how you're going to win. Remember, when you're raising money, that one slide that talks about your unique approach, investors are saying to themselves, is this market big? And is this a strategic approach that's different from everybody else? So I think lean starts with finding that playground.
All right, that was great. First move advantage is well known in the startup space. Are there advantages you see in second mover advantages for startups when defining your own playground?
Yeah, a lot of times when you define a playground, you don't always get it exactly right. The one thing I would say is I would think that if you do a good job of defining your playground, there aren't second movers, right? Because you've defined the playground differently than anyone else. I know for us in the health rewards space, the companies that we were competing against were multi-billion-dollar companies, and we were just a couple of guys in a basement. But what we started to do was define the criteria for why, for example, a health plan would buy something or not buy something. And by defining it differently, the second movers were fighting on our terms, right? And so don't get me wrong, there's a lot to be learned from following, but I think if you're following in this day and age, unless you have a ton of capital, it becomes very difficult, as opposed to maybe learning from what somebody did before, and creating your own playground.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Sorry for the lag here. Going back, there are a good amount of questions. All right. Would you build a playground that is dependent on another product that users have to use to experience your product or platform? Or is this more of a partnership discussion?
All of the above. The way that you find your playgrounds can be all kinds of different means. I'll give you a quick example. Somebody many years ago came out with a fitness app. And he thought the fitness app he had created was beautiful and awesome, terrific. And with one Google search, you pulled up 1,000 fitness apps. And we said, so tell me a little bit more about your app. And it was okay. It wasn't, I said, let's assume it's the best app ever created in the world. How are you going to win? Well, it turns out they had a relationship with GNC. And GNC, for many of you that know, has had stores all over the US and throughout the world for years, but had no play in the wellness business. So their fitness app, which frankly wasn't that great, all of a sudden became GNC's distribution channel into the wellness space. So they plopped it in every store, they put it on their website, and all of a sudden they had strategic distribution with frankly an app that was deficient. Their playground was a partnership, right? They found a place where nobody else was playing, which was GNC, and all of a sudden they went from nothing to being distributed in thousands and thousands of stores. So your playground, especially in this day and age, requires great creativity. It doesn't just jump off the page, but it can be anything from a partnership to a market, to a segment, to a product positioning, even to a target customer that they're going after.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Michael. That was great.